In the summer of 1920, a line forms outside a small office on School Street in Boston. It is not a line of the desperate. It is a line of the careful. Shopkeepers, clerks, widows holding bank books, police officers still in uniform. They have come to give a stranger their money because the stranger has promised to give it back to them doubled. The man inside was 40 cents short of nothing when the year began. By the height of that same summer, he is taking in $250,000 a day, and he keeps the cash in waste baskets because he has run out of places to put it. His name is Charles Ponzi, and within a few months, his name will stop being a name at all. It will become the word we still use, a century later, for the oldest trick that keeps on working. But here is the part that should keep you up at night. The math never worked. Not for a single day. Anyone could have checked. He was born Carlo Pietro Giovanni Guglielmo Tebaldo Ponzi on the 3rd of March, 1882 in Lugo, in the north of Italy. The long string of names was the most generous thing his family ever gave him. He spent his small inheritance in the cafes and lecture halls of Rome and arrived at the docks with empty pockets and expensive taste. On the 15th of November, 1903, he stepped off a ship in Boston. He liked to say he came ashore with $2.50, having gambled away the rest on the crossing. We should treat that figure as his story rather than his record, because Ponzi was always the author of his own legend. For years he drifted, dishwasher, clerk, sign painter. Then he went north to Montreal and took a job at a small bank serving Italian immigrants, a place called Banco Zerosi. The bank paid a rate far above its rivals. In truth, it was a trap. The owner was paying old depositors not from profit, but from the deposits of new ones. When the new money slowed, the bank fell, and Ponzi watched the whole thing from the inside. He saw exactly how it ran and exactly how it ended. His early record is a matter of public record, and we state it as fact. In 1908, he was convicted in Canada forging a check and served roughly 3 years. After his release, he crossed back into the United States, was caught smuggling Italian immigrants over the border, and served further time in a federal prison in Atlanta between 1911 and 1913. So by the time he settled back in Boston, married a stenographer named Rose Gnecco in 1918, and began looking for his fortune, Charles Ponzi was not a naive dreamer. He was a man who had already been to prison twice, who had already seen a fraud built and broken, and who was about to find his loophole. In 1919, a letter arrived from Spain. Inside, along with the correspondence, was a small slip of paper called an international reply coupon. It was a real thing, and it was perfectly legal. The coupon let a sender in one country prepay return postage in another. The recipient took it to their own post office and exchanged it for stamps. But Ponzi noticed something inside that courtesy. The First World War had wrecked the exchange rates of Europe. A coupon bought cheaply in a country with a weak currency could, in theory, be redeemed in the United States for postage worth considerably more. Buy low in one country, redeem high in another. On paper, it was arbitrage, and arbitrage is not a crime. It is finance. That kernel of truth is what let intelligent people believe the rest. In the last weeks of 1919 and the first weeks of 1920, Ponzi opened a business in Boston with a name as solid as granite, the Securities Exchange Company. And he made an offer that should have stopped every careful person cold: 50% profit in 45 days, or 100% in 90. At a time when an ordinary savings account paid about 5% in a whole year, Ponzi was promising to double your money before the season changed. Now here is where the arithmetic begins to scream. To pay everyone what he promised, he would have needed to buy, ship, and redeem coupons by the tens of millions. The coupons were small. The redemption was for stamps, not cash. The paperwork alone would have buried an army of clerks. The honest version of his business could not have earned a fraction of what he was promising. So what was he actually doing with the money? The answer is the whole story, and it is almost insultingly simple. He was not trading coupons at all. He was taking the money from the people who arrived on Tuesday and using it to pay the people who had arrived on Monday. And for a while, it worked beautifully. The first investors were paid in full, exactly on time. They told their neighbors. The line outside School Street grew from a handful to a flood. The answer is momentum and proof. Every investor who got paid became living, breathing evidence that the impossible was real. You did not have to trust Ponzi. You only had to trust your neighbor, who had handed him $100 in March and walked out with $150 in May. The numbers from that spring are almost difficult to read aloud. In February, the company took in a few $1,000s. By March, it was tens of thousands. By June, the total handed to Ponzi had passed $2.5 million. At the peak, in July of 1920, he was reportedly taking in around $250,000 in a single day. Over roughly 8 months, he gathered something on the order of $15 million. The cash arrived faster than anyone could count it. Reporting from the time describes money stacked in baskets and stuffed into drawers. Ponzi bought a mansion. He bought fine suits. He bought a controlling interest in a Boston bank, the Hanover Trust, partly so that he would always have somewhere friendly to keep the river of money flowing. And the investors numbered in the tens of thousands. They were not only the poor and the hopeful, they were the middle class. They were the comfortable. Period reporting claimed that a striking share of Boston's own police force had money in the scheme, though that figure should be treated as the color of the time rather than a hard ledger entry. He was, for one bright and impossible summer, the most talked about man in Boston. On the 24th of July, 1920, the Boston Post put Ponzi on its front page in glowing terms. It was the best advertising he ever had. But fame is a current that runs both ways, and the same attention that filled his baskets now turned skeptical eyes upon his books. The first man to truly do the math in public was a financial publisher named Clarence Barron. He asked a question so simple it was devastating. If Ponzi was funding all of this by trading postal coupons, how many would that require? Something like 160 million would have to be in circulation worldwide. The real number was about 27,000. Barron noticed something quieter, too. The man selling the world on coupons was not himself buying coupons. He kept his own fortune in ordinary bank accounts. The salesman did not eat his own cooking. Then came the man on the inside. Ponzi had hired a publicist named William McMasters to manage his image. McMasters got a look at the actual books, and what he saw turned him from promoter into witness. He concluded that Ponzi was hopelessly insolvent, and he sold that conclusion to the Boston Post. In early August of 1920, the expose ran. State and federal officials moved in to examine the accounts, and their review confirmed the worst. The company's debts dwarfed its assets. And so the line outside School Street changed its nature overnight. It was no longer a line of people coming to give him money. It was a run, a wall of people demanding their money back, all at once, the one thing a scheme like this can never survive. In the middle of August 1920, Charles Ponzi was arrested and charged by federal authorities with mail fraud. The Hanover Trust, the bank he had bought to feed the machine, was seized by the state. The Securities Exchange Company and the bank fell together almost in the same breath. On the 1st of November 1920, he pleaded guilty in federal court to mail fraud and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He served about 3.5. When the federal sentence ended, the state of Massachusetts was waiting with more than 20 larceny charges of its own. The legal pursuit would follow him for years, long after the line on School Street had emptied for good. The years after the fall were a long, slow descent. There were appeals, more prison time, and a doomed attempt at a Florida land scheme that landed him in trouble again. In October of 1934, having never become a citizen and carrying felony convictions, Charles Ponzi was deported to Italy. He drifted. For a time, he worked in Brazil for an Italian airline until the war shut the operation down. The most famous swindler of his age ended his life in a charity ward of a hospital in Rio de Janeiro. He died on the 18th of January, 1949. The estate he left behind was reported at about $75. He died with nothing, almost exactly as he had arrived. But he left one thing behind that has never lost a cent of value: his name. A Ponzi scheme, we still call it that. A fraud in which the returns paid to earlier investors come not from any real profit, but from the money of those who arrive later. It survives only as long as new money keeps coming, and it collapses the instant it stops. And here's the honest footnote the legend usually skips. He did not invent it. The little bank in Montreal had used the same trick. Others had run versions of it decades before him, in that very city of Boston. Ponzi's genius, if you can call it that, was not the idea. It was the scale, the speed, and the spectacle. He ran the oldest con loudly enough and large enough that the world finally gave it his name, which returns us, one last time, to the question we began with. How did thousands of careful people hand their savings to a man whose numbers could not possibly be true? The answer is not that they were foolish. The answer is that he showed them proof, real proof, in the form of neighbors who had been paid. He gave them a true story about a real loophole, and then he let their own trust in one another do the rest. That is the quiet horror of the original con. It does not require a fool. It only requires a line, a promise, and just enough truth to make the impossible look like patience rewarded. The records in this case are public. Everything you have seen tonight is drawn from the public record.